When you think about the classic image of a researcher or just someone doing a truly deep dive into a new subject, there's almost always this expectation of physical substance.
Oh, definitely. Like a tangible object.
Right. It's like archaeology. You picture someone digging into the ground, carefully brushing away, centuries of dirt, and finally pulling up this intricate, solid clay pot.
Yeah, and the historian can literally point to it and say, well, there it is. There is the history.
Exactly. It takes up space in the real world.
It's a very comforting image, honestly. It's binary. The artifact exists in three-dimensional space, or it just doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to think of our knowledge gathering in the exact same way. We like our information to be physically present.
Like a book we can actually hold.
Right. A book where we can fan the pages, smell that, aging paper, and physically feel the progress of our understanding as the weight of the pages shifts from our right hand to our left.
I love that feeling. It's solid. It's undeniably there. But then you and I and you listening to this right now, we step into the modern world of digital archives.
Which changes everything.
It really does. We step into search engines, global databases, and the vast invisible architecture of metadata. And suddenly that solid clay pot vanishes.
Poof. Gone.
The physical book is just gone. Instead, we find ourselves looking at this diagnostic landscape. We aren't looking at the object itself. We're looking at, the shadow it casts across a network.
Which requires a completely different analytical toolkit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you transition from examining physical artifacts to examining digital metadata, you're looking at the footprint, not the foot.
I like that. The footprint, not the foot.
Exactly. You're analyzing the cataloging systems, the algorithmic indexing, and those commercial gateways that either grant or deny access to the actual information.
Right.
It's a space where visibility and availability are just profoundly decoupled.
Which brings us to our focus today. So welcome to the deep dive. And for you listening right now, we really need to set the stage here because you are in for a highly unusual yet incredibly relevant journey.
Highly unusual is putting it mildly.
Seriously, because normally you hand us a stack of dense sources, like a 50-page research paper, a groundbreaking expose, a historical manuscript, whatever.
Heavy reading.
Right. But today, the source material you've given us to explore is not a full article. It's not a manuscript. It is entirely a digital footprint.
Which is wild.
Specifically, you've handed us the Google Books metadata page and the storefront interface for one single specific text.
And honestly, it is a brilliant exercise. What we are doing today is basically a form of digital forensics.
Digital forensics. Okay, explain that.
Well, we are analyzing the container rather than the contents.
Yes. The mission for this deep dive is to extract meaning from the digital trace of a book titled Batik Nusantara, Makna Filosofis Cara Pembuatan dan Industri Batik. It's authored by Ari Wulandari.
And to be clear, we have zero access to the actual text.
None. We cannot read a single page of Wulandari's research. Our goal is to explore what the metadata itself, the digital wrapper, the way it's categorized, the buttons surrounding it, the purchasing options, what all of that reveals about the promise and the reality of cultural knowledge in our, hyper-connected digital age.
Because the underlying truth of the internet is that the way information is packaged, the way it is algorithmically indexed, and crucially, the way it is withheld from us.
Oh, the withholding is key.
Right. All of that tells a story that is just as structurally important as the information itself. The architecture of the archive dictates what we are actually capable of learning.
Sometimes looking at the gateway to knowledge is just as illuminating as walking through the door. And today we are standing right on the threshold, examining the locks, the hinges, and, the sign on the door.
So let's start with that sign.
Let's do it. The very first piece of core data we have from your source is the title of the book itself. Batik Nusantara, Makna Filosofis Cara Pembuatan dan Industri Batik.
Which, translated from Indonesian, roughly means archipelago batik. Philosophical meanings, making process, and the batik industry.
It is a meticulously constructed title.
It really is.
Yeah.
And even without having access to the interior text, this title functions as a massively comprehensive, multidisciplinary syllabus.
A syllabus? Wow.
It has this very deliberate tripartite structure that signals exactly how the author believes this cultural artifact just has to be studied.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when you say tripartite structure, you're talking about those three distinct pillars separated by commas in the subtitle, right?
Yes. The title dictates to the reader, to you, the learner, that to truly understand the concept of Batik Nusantara, you just cannot view it through a single academic lens.
Right, it's too complex for that.
Exactly. First, it promises magnaphilausis, the philosophical meanings. By putting this first, the metadata is signaling that batik is not merely a textile. It is a visual language.
A language, so it's about what the patterns are actually saying.
Yes. It's a text woven with spiritual, cultural, and historical meaning. This demands an approach grounded in, art history and anthropology. It's the conceptual foundation.
Right, so it establishes that the fabric has a soul, a symbolic weight, before you even talk about how it's physically made.
Precisely.
Right.
But then, the title refuses to let the subject just, float in the realm of pure theory.
Which academics love to do.
Oh, they do. But here, it immediately grounds that high-level philosophy into physical reality with the second pillar. Cara Pembuan, the making process.
The craft of it.
Right. It shifts the discipline from philosophy to the mechanics of craft. It signals that to understand the culture, you really must understand the labor.
The actual sweat and tears.
Yeah. You have to understand the chemistry of the wax-resist dyeing, the specific botanical dyes they use, the physical toll on the artisans' bodies, and just the sheer human mechanics of manifesting that invisible philosophy into the physical world.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
You are framing this title as this grand, deliberate academic manifesto. You're calling it a miniature syllabus.
I am.
But isn't it highly likely that this is just brute force search engine optimization?
The SEO argument.
I mean, authors today know that nobody is browsing physical bookshelves anymore. If you want your book on Indonesian textiles to be found, you literally just have to cram every possible search term into the title.
That's a fair point.
People will search batik philosophy, they will search how to make batik, and they will search batik business. The author just threw all three into the subtitle to appease the Google indexing algorithm. Does it really reflect a profound multidisciplinary approach, or just, survival in a digital database?
That is exactly the tension we need to explore here. You are absolutely right that algorithmic discoverability is the driving force.
Okay, so I'm not crazy.
Not at all. But I would argue that SEO constraints are actually reshaping the parameters of academic research itself.
Wait, really? How so?
Let's look at the mechanics of why that happens. In a physical bookstore, a book can have a poetic, abstract title. The cover art does the heavy lifting. You can pick it up, flip to the table of contents, and figure out what it's about.
Right, the physical book is its own context.
Exactly. The metadata and the data are physically bound together. But in a digital database, the search engine utilizes what's called a bag of words model, combined with natural language processing, to evaluate relevance.
So it's just scanning for keywords.
Right. The algorithm parses the query, say, a student searching for the economic impact of batik, and scans its index for semantic matches. If the book was simply titled Threads of the Archipelago, the algorithm would likely bury it because it lacks the semantic markers of economics or philosophy.
I see.
Therefore, the metadata must become hyper-descriptive. It must contain the entire architecture of the author's argument. So, to answer your pushback,
Yeah.
yes, it is SEO.
But it's doing double duty.
Exactly. Because the metadata is the book's only advocate in the digital space, the algorithm forces the author to explicitly define the boundaries of their discipline right there in the title.
That is a fascinating shift in how we structure knowledge. The algorithmic requirement for discoverability actually forces clarity.
It does. It really does.
The title has to be so heavily optimized and descriptive that it teaches you the parameters of the subject before you even click. If you, listening to this, wanted to go off and research batik on your own, this title just gave you the necessary roadmap. You have to understand the symbols, understand the craft, and understand the market.
And let's look at that third pillar. Industry the batik industry. This is a crucial inclusion.
Because it brings in the money aspect.
Exactly. It shifts the lens again, this time to macroeconomics. How is this heritage commercialized? How does it survive in a modern global market?
Right.
It tells us that cultural preservation isn't just a matter of putting things in glass cases in museums. It's about supply chains, commercial viability, and the actual livelihoods of the artisans.
It brings it back to the real world.
By including this in the title, the metadata makes a powerful claim. You cannot separate the cultural value of the art from the economic reality of the artist.
It's incredible how much heavy lifting those few words are doing. It reminds me of the cognitive mechanics of reading a menu.
A menu. Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine you're walking down a street and you look through the window of a really nice restaurant. Pressed against the glass is a highly detailed menu describing a 3-course meal.
Okay.
You read the descriptions, the ingredients, the preparation methods, the flavor profiles. Before you ever taste the food, your brain has already constructed a simulation of the meal. You know the exact experience the chef intended.
That you're salivating.
Exactly. But you are still standing on the sidewalk. You haven't tasted a single thing. That is what this metadata is doing to us. It constructs the simulation of Wulandari's expertise, but we are locked outside the text.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And what we need to examine next is the street that this restaurant is located on.
The
Because we know what the book promises. We have our 3-course syllabus. But where exactly does this promise live? What is the environment surrounding this metadata?
Right.
That brings us to the second major component of the source material you provided, the digital ecosystem itself. We're looking at the architecture of the digital library hosting this metadata.
And this is where the environment gets really, really weird if you stop and actually think about it.
It's bizarre.
The source text gives us the literal navigation bar of the Google ecosystem that is framing this book. It reads, and I'll just list it out as it appears in your source.
Please do.
It says Telusuri, Gembar, Maps, Play, YouTube, Burita, Gmail, Drive, Ladinya, which means search, images, maps, play, YouTube, news, Gmail, Drive, more.
Wow.
Right. And then it leads into user account features like login and Calexico, which is my collection.
If we step back and perform a meta-analysis of this interface, we are looking at how human cultural artifacts, like a comprehensive book on the spiritual and economic realities of traditional Indonesian batik, are contextualized within massive, vertically integrated tech ecosystems.
I want to focus on that word, contextualized, because think about how you used to interact with a book like this.
Oh, it's a whole ritual.
Yes. You'd walk into a university library. The architecture of the building itself is designed to create a specific cognitive state.
It's quiet.
The ceilings are often high. You go to a specific shelf, maybe under a specific Dewey Decimal or Library of Congress classification for Southeast Asian textiles.
Right.
And the physical book is physically surrounded by other books on the exact same topic. The entire environment is engineered to keep your brain in a state of focused academic contemplation.
Yes. The physical library is an architecture of focus. It isolates the information to elevate its importance. But the digital architecture we are analyzing here highlights a radical shift in how knowledge is framed. Kari Wulandari's work on the deeply philosophical craft of batik is no longer surrounded by peer texts on a quiet shelf.
No, it's not.
It is surrounded by a navigation bar, linking you directly to Google Maps, YouTube algorithms, your daily Gmail inbox, and your cloud storage.
But let me play devil's advocate here again.
Bring it on.
You're contrasting the quiet, sacred space of the physical library with this noisy digital interface. But isn't the integration of a cultural text into that interface a massive victory for accessibility?
In what sense?
Well, it's like finding an ancient, beautiful artifact not locked away in some elite hush museum, but placed right in the middle of a bustling transit hub, like Grand Central Station.
Right.
People are rushing by to check their email. They are frantically looking up directions on maps, watching viral videos. And right there in the flow of their daily life is this profound text on Batik Nusantara. Doesn't placing it next to Gmail democratize the knowledge?
It normalizes it, maybe.
Right. It normalizes the presence of deep culture in our everyday digital utility.
That is the utopian argument for digital integration, yes. The idea that by lowering the barrier to entry, by placing the library inside the transit hub, you increase the dissemination of knowledge.
Exactly.
But let's look at the actual cognitive mechanics of what happens when you do that. What's fascinating here is the concept of context collapse.
Context collapse. Break that down for us.
Context collapse occurs when multiple distinct audiences or environments are flattened into a single space, stripping away the social and environmental cues that normally guide our behavior and focus.
So because everything is in one place, we don't know how to act.
Basically, in this digital ecosystem, the interface treats every piece of data as functionally equivalent. The medium delivering a nuanced philosophical treatise on cultural heritage is the exact same medium delivering your high-stress work emails and your driving directions.
Oh, man, that's so true.
The UI design does not differentiate between the sacred, the academic, and the purely utilitarian.
So because the interface looks exactly the same, whether you are looking at Wulandari's book or like a spam email, your brain doesn't receive the physical cues to shift into deep reading mode.
Exactly. And furthermore, we have to analyze the business model behind this interface.
The money?
Always the money. Alphabet, the parent company of Google, operates on an attention economy model. Their ecosystem is designed around horizontal integration. They want to keep you inside their suite of products for as long as possible.
So the navigation bar isn't just trying to be helpful.
No, the navigation bar isn't just a list of helpful links. It is an array of highly optimized off-ramps designed to capture and redirect your attention.
Wow. So if you are a learner trying to dive into the Magna Philosophus, the philosophical meaning of a batik motif, the interface is actively working against your concentration.
Actively fighting you.
Literally 1 centimeter above the title of the book is a button specifically engineered to trigger a dopamine loop by beckoning you to check your YouTube notifications or your Gmail.
It creates profound cognitive dissonance. The environment actively undermines the deep, sustained focus required to actually comprehend the metadata you are looking at.
It's like trying to read a textbook at a rock concert.
Exactly. The digital ecosystem treats Ari Wulandari's life's work as interchangeable in weight and urgency with a calendar reminder. It is perfectly accessible, as you pointed out, but the context is ruthlessly utilitarian.
Which is the ultimate double-edged sword of modern learning. You have the whole world at your fingertips, but your fingertips are constantly slipping on the interface.
That's a great way to put it.
You are invited to learn everything, but the architecture of the platform makes it nearly impossible to focus on anything. And the source text gives us another clue about how this ecosystem tries to mimic physical reality to keep you engaged.
You're talking about the collection feature.
Yes. Down the page, we see elements like Collexiku My Collection.
That is a vital piece of the metadata. My collection implies a digital simulation of a personal library.
It feels like ownership.
Right. It suggests ownership. It tells the user, you can take this artifact from the noisy digital transit hub and place it in your own private, curated locker. It borrows the language of physical ownership to create a sense of permanence.
But as we see in the very next, and frankly, the most maddening section of your source material, that concept of digital ownership or even just digital access is a complete and total illusion.
It's a mirage.
It really is. Which brings us to the core of this deep dive. We have to talk about the paradox of availability and the incredibly frustrating reality of digital friction.
This is where the metadata reveals the underlying plumbing of the internet. And it is a fascinatingly broken system.
Okay, picture this. You are you, the listener. You are researching batik. You've read the brilliant syllabus-like title.
You're invested.
You've navigated the distracting, noisy transit hub of the Google interface. You are ready. You want the book. But the source material presents an incredibly conflicting, almost schizophrenic status of availability.
Let's hear the exact phrasing.
First, the page bluntly states, Dapat kang buku cetak. And then, ibuku tidak tersedia, which translates to a highly contradictory mess. Get print book, ebook not available.
Okay, so a mixed message right out of the gate.
Very mixed. Then, immediately below that, it lists international sellers. It gives you links to Amazon.co.uk and IDFix.
IDFix.
Yeah, IDFix. Then, as if realizing that might not work, it gently suggests, Gari di perpustakaan, search in a library.
So it's sending you back to the physical world.
Exactly. And finally, it aggressively pivots into corporate marketing. Belanja buku di Google Play shop for books on Google Play, with the tagline, Jelajahi ebook store terbesar di dunia, explore the world's largest ebook store, accompanied by a button to buka Google Play, sekarang open Google Play now.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what you are seeing in this fragmented block of text is the modern researcher's dilemma perfectly encapsulated.
It's maddening.
You have successfully utilized the most powerful indexing engine in human history. You have located the exact specific resource you need. You are at the absolute finish line of your search. And instead of the knowledge, you hit a towering wall of digital friction.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and we need to unpack the actual mechanisms of why this happens, because on a geographical and logical level, this makes zero sense.
No sense at all.
This is a book about Nusantara, the Indonesian archipelago. It is about local indigenous cultural practices published in Indonesian. Yet the global tech ecosystem is routing your potential purchase through completely disconnected international storefronts.
Right.
It is suggesting you buy an Indonesian cultural text from Amazon.co.uk, the United Kingdom, or from IDFix, which is a major Turkish online retailer. Why on earth is an algorithm pointing an Indonesian search query to a server in Turkey to buy a book about Indonesian textiles?
To understand that, we have to explain the mechanics of how global publishing databases interact with search algorithms. What you are witnessing is the collision between universal indexing and territorial copyright law.
Okay, break that collision down. How does the database actually work behind the scenes?
Every published book is assigned an ISBN, an International Standard Book Number. This number is essentially the book's DNA in the global supply chain.
Okay, the DNA. Got it.
It contains metadata about the publisher, the format, and the title. Now, Google Books operates by deploying automated software crawlers that constantly scrape data from vast international registries of these ISBNs.
So they're just pulling data constantly.
As well as data from library catalogs and digital storefronts around the world.
So Google is just hoovering up every record of a book's existence from thousands of different global databases and aggregating it onto this one page.
Exactly. The search engine's primary goal is completeness. It wants to prove to you that it knows everything that exists.
The all-knowing oracle.
Right. However, knowing a book exists is entirely different from having the legal right to distribute it.
Ah, right.
This is where digital rights management, or DRM, and regional licensing come into play. Publishing rights are incredibly archaic.
You really are.
An author or a publisher might sell the digital distribution rights for Europe to one company, the physical rights in Asia to another, and hold the digital rights in their home country entirely.
Wait, so the digital file isn't just floating freely in the cloud, it's tied to digital borders.
Precisely. A digital text file is artificially constrained by geographic borders coded into the distribution platform.
That's so frustrating.
So when Google's algorithm builds this page for Ari Wulandari's book, it pulls in the metadata perfectly. But when it tries to populate the where to buy section, it relies on automated APIs connecting to global retailers.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If the original Indonesian publisher's digital portal is offline, or if the book is physically out of print locally, the algorithm just grabs whatever global database still has the ISBN listed as active.
So Amazon UK and the Turkish site IDFix might just have a dormant database entry for this ISBN, and the Google algorithm blindly presents that as a viable option, regardless of whether a user in Indonesia can actually complete the transaction or whether those sites actually have physical stock.
That is exactly what happens. The algorithm is incredibly sophisticated at indexing, but it is entirely ignorant of the practical realities of the global supply chain.
It's smart but dumb at the same time.
It illustrates the fragmented, absurd nature of digital knowledge distribution. The metadata is globally ubiquitous. The search engine knows the book exists everywhere all at once.
Right.
But the actual access to the text is trapped in a complex web of regional licensing, out-of-print statuses, and algorithmic guesswork.
It's essentially an algorithmic artifact. The UI is displaying a database entry as an actionable item when legally and technically it is blocked.
Yes.
The interface promises a transaction that the backend absolutely cannot fulfill. You, the listener, have definitely experienced this.
We all have.
You're trying to become well-informed for a meeting, or you're deep into a new hobby and you find the perfect source, and then bam, paywall. Out-of-print notice, or you get that dreaded message, this item is not available in your country. It is deeply frustrating.
And this specific phenomenon creates what information scientists refer to as the ghosts of digital libraries.
The ghosts of digital libraries. I like that. Explain what makes a book a ghost.
A digital ghost is a text that is immaculately, permanently indexed, but functionally inaccessible.
It's haunting the database.
Exactly. Its metadata is scrubbed, optimized, and forever preserved on Google's servers. We know it exists, we know its exact page count, we know the author, we know its tripartite structure.
We know everything about it except what's inside.
But it is simultaneously unavailable in standard accessible formats. It is trapped in a state of commercial limbo. It is perfectly visible, but completely untouchable.
Perfectly visible, but completely untouchable. That is a stunning indictment of the utopian promise of the internet.
It really makes you rethink things.
Because the initial promise of the digital age, the whole ethos behind early tech platforms, was that all human knowledge would be universally accessible, a borderless library of Alexandria.
Right, that was the dream.
But the reality, as your source text perfectly proves, is that universal indexing is not the same thing as universal access.
Which raises an important question about the nature of the Google Books project itself. You have to remember the history here.
Right, the early days.
In the early 2000s, Google set out to literally scan every physical book in the world. They partnered with university libraries and scanned millions of volumes.
I remember that.
But they ran into massive, decade-long lawsuits with the Authors Guild over copyright infringement.
Right, because they were scanning entire texts and making them searchable without necessarily securing the rights from the copyright holders.
Exactly. And the legal compromise that emerged from those battles shapes the interface we're looking at today.
Oh, so that's why it's like this.
Google is allowed to index the books and sometimes show snippets of the text, because that is considered fair use and serves as a search function.
Okay.
But they cannot distribute the full text unless they have an explicit commercial agreement. So we are left with this architecture where the platform is legally required to show you what you cannot have. It is exceptional at displaying the locked door.
And the juxtaposition on the page is almost comedic. It explicitly says, Ibuku Tidak Tersedia ebook, not available, and literally right next to it, it runs marketing copy. Jelajahi ebook store terbesar di dunia. Explore the world's largest ebook store.
It's a bit tone deaf.
It's almost mocking the user. Welcome to the world's largest bookstore, where the specific book you need is fundamentally unavailable.
It is peak digital irony. But if we connect this back to the core subject, the preservation of cultural heritage, this friction reveals a critical vulnerability.
How so?
Well, Ari Wulandari's book is an essential text on traditional batik. It covers the philosophy, the making, and the industry. If a book like this goes out of print physically and is trapped in DRM or regional licensing issues digitally, its knowledge begins to actively decay.
Because the transmission is broken.
Yes. The metadata survives. The digital footprint is preserved on Alphabet's servers indefinitely.
Right.
But the actual transmission of that specialized, deeply researched cultural knowledge from the author to you, the learner, is severed. We are preserving the catalog, but we are slowly losing access to the books themselves. The archive becomes a graveyard of metadata.
Man, that's dark. So what does this all mean? We've spent this entire deep dive analyzing nothing but the wrapper.
Just the metadata.
Right. We didn't get to read Ari Wulandari's brilliant insights. Because of the rules of your source material and the reality of the digital friction we just discussed, we couldn't examine the specific philosophical differences between coastal and inland batik motifs.
Couldn't read her analysis of the intricate wax-resist dyeing process either.
No. Or the economic impact of the global market on local artisans. The system literally wouldn't let us through the door.
But I would argue that by analyzing the footprint, we learned a tremendous amount about the terrain.
I completely agree. We explored the incredibly heavy lifting required of a modern title. We saw how Batik, Nusantara, Makna Philosophis, Karapembuatan, Dan Industri Batik serves as a masterclass in setting academic expectations and navigating SEO constraints.
And we looked deeply at the architecture of the digital library.
Yes, exploring the cognitive dissonance of placing profound cultural texts inside a utilitarian transit hub filled with Gmail and YouTube.
And finally, we mapped the frustrating mechanics of digital availability.
Where global tech giants advertise infinite knowledge while their automated systems hand you a dead end.
It serves as a vital reminder that the metadata of a source is, in fact, a deeply important source itself.
Absolutely.
The way knowledge is packaged, the way it is titled for algorithms, and crucially, the way it is commercially gatekept through DRM and international licensing, tells us as much about the values and flaws of our information age as the book itself would tell us about batik.
That's a great point.
True critical thinking isn't just about reading the text. It's about interrogating the systems that deliver or fail to deliver the text to you.
Which brings us to the end of this highly meta deep dive. You brought us a digital shadow, and together we unpacked the ghost.
It was a fun one.
It really was. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you, listening right now, with a final thought to mull over. Something to critically explore the next time you are deep into a research session and you find yourself staring at a not available screen on a search engine.
A feeling we all know too well.
Too well. If a culturally significant text is perfectly indexed by the world's largest search engine, optimized so flawlessly that its title teaches you the syllabus and everyone knows it exists, but it remains commercially